Today, I have the great fortune of getting a chance to talk to Eric Rodent Cheslak. We're going to just call him Rodent because that's his artist name. That's how an awful lot of people know him. And so we'll just go with that. So, hey, Rodent, how's it going?
It's going good, Darwin. Thanks. Thanks for having me on your show.
Hey, thanks a lot for taking the time out of your schedule to do this. I really appreciate it. Now, I know you mostly. I got the introduction to you from Bana Haffar, but I know of you through your work with the modular on the spot stuff. But as I went digging around, I ran across an awful lot of music and an awful lot of like pretty dark and interesting music. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what you think is your work, right? Better for you to tell me than me to guess, right?
Well, describe your music. I try. You know what? I try to really do a lot of different things all the time, like, or just not the same style like all the time. It's definitely all made on the Eurorack modular synth system these days, and I guess preliminarily, I'd like to say I'm trying to make music these days that gives no nods to typical everyday music, rock and roll, rap, R&B, any of that. I seriously strive to make music that gives no nods to that at all. I think it's time that we move past all that stuff.
Sure.
So with that being said, I don't know. I mean, I like darker music, and I don't know. I guess that's kind of, some people have asked me before as well. Like, do you only make dark music? Well, I don't know. That's just, I make music, and that's what comes out.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you say that you're trying to avoid like giving a nod to other music because it is. I would say that what you're doing is really unique, and the other thing that I like is unlike a lot of music that modular heads are making, because there is sort of like this kind of stock, highly rhythmic, really noisy sourced music, right? But yours is kind of your stuff kind of fits in a different spot, and it because it's got some melody, but it's not what I would call melodic music, and it's got like kind of a dark texture, but it's not what I would call cinematic. So it seems to sort of like kind of like slip through the slots of a lot of genres, which is kind of cool, and it makes it pretty interesting to listen to.
Well, thanks. I like that. I don't know. I like to say that my system helps me make the music. Yeah, I like to think of myself as the conductor of the symphony of all these modules in my modular system, because so many of them are so unique and very playable and made by all these really rad brainiac engineers that I've been lucky enough to become friends with several of them over the past few years. And I don't know, I feel like my interaction with all of these modules in my system, that's part of the creation process, that how my music comes out.
Sure. That's actually an interesting point. I've never really thought about it that way, but there's lots. I mean, the thing that's kind of unique about working with a modular system that's like maybe different than if you're a guitar player or a saxophone player is that you sort of come to know your instrument a little piece at a time, right? So it's not like with a guitar you're like, oh, I'm going to get a neck and I'm going to play the neck for a while and then I'm going to get some strings, right?
Yeah.
But with a modular, you start off with some pieces, and then you're like, I feel the need for this other thing, and your set of pieces are almost always going to be completely different from someone else's. So
Yeah.
by definition, it's going to be your kind of unique creation, and the way you come to learn it is going to be unique too. I didn't think about it that way, but that's kind of cool.
I like to think about it like that sometimes.
Yeah. So I would say that, talking about the music of yours that I've heard, I would say that it has a really unique voice. One of the things I like doing on my podcast is kind of find out how people come to get their artistic voice, right? Where does it come from? How did they grow up? What other arts or what other things were they into that might have influenced them over time? What's sort of your beginner story? What does the start of your story look like?
Well, the start of my story was in the early 90s, getting my first drum machine. It was a Roland R5. I got a Casio CZ101 after that for a little while. Just some pedals and a guitar. And I've always tried to learn how to play guitar. I still can't play guitar, man. I could have dedicated 5 years of my life to learn how to play guitar, and I couldn't do it. And it's one of the reasons why I don't play guitar today is, you know what? I'm just not into the way guitar sounds, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Like I do listen to a lot of guitar music, some of my favorite post-punk and goth stuff, rock and roll stuff, or punk and hardcore stuff from when I was a kid is like all guitar-based music because that's what I knew
Right.
as music growing up. But unless it's me listening to one of those old favorites these days, I don't listen to guitar music really at all. And I'm not saying that I listen to trap right now either, but I don't really listen to guitar music or I guess popular music these days really at all. Sometimes when I'm riding around in my car, I find myself listening to my own tracks to like, hey, do I like this? Do I want to put this on my SoundCloud? Should I save this for my next tape or CD? Like, I feel like I'm going through tracks in my car as I'm like, whether I'm like driving to go meet up with dudes to shoot a photo or something. And I don't know, but I guess back to my start. After I realized that I was really interested in making music and making electronic music, I started taking recording studio engineering classes at Northern Virginia Community College. I grew up just outside of Washington, D.C. in Fairfax County. So I went to Northern Virginia Community College, and the first time I walked in the recording studio, I looked in the vocal booth, and that was also the synth room. And I was like, whoa, what is that thing? And it was an ARP 2600.
Ah.
And they had that and a Juno 106 and a DX7. So it was a really good small selection of enough to completely freak my brain out.
Right.
And I spent more time in that synth lab than probably anybody else who was taking those classes at the time and was trying to get my hands on more synthesizers and different drum machines. But what it also did, too, is it helped me learn some of the recording process. I mean, we were actually doing stuff on tape back then. I mean,
Right.
which, like I said, this was the early 90s. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the digital audio workstation was not very happening at that
It was
point.
it was a dream at that point, right?
Yeah, it was a dream, and what they had then now is more than a dinosaur.
Right.
So, I don't know, that was kind of like my jump start. And from there, it was just kind of collecting new synthesizers, and that's when I started making music then and not even putting the guitar into it.
Mm-hmm.
I was really into like industrial stuff back then, and that was like heavy electronics with guitar, heavy guitar riffs thrown in, in different places and, or over the whole thing. And then it was like after a while, I realized like, I'm not even putting guitar in stuff I'm making.
Right.
Like, I was just like, you know what? I don't see the need for it. And then I kind of, I don't know, shunned out. I've gone back and forth with guitar like 5 different times since then. Like wanting to learn it, and then now finally I'm completely like hands off. Even though I try to get Bana to play more bass, it's really funny that said I'll listen to some of my old post-punk favorites.
Yeah.
After like, hey, can you play this bass line? And then her eyes roll. And man, come on, this is like a 8th grade level bass line.
Right.
And it's like, dude, this is Sisters of Mercy. What are you talking about? Like, so, I don't know. I guess I could say that what's really affected the music that I make and my start was the music that I've always listened to that I found really inspiring and stuff that shaped me early on, because that was just like a bunch of heavy metal and hardcore and punk and stuff. But it was like when I got introduced to like Skinny Puppy and Frontline Assembly and Front 242,
Mm-hmm.
like Depeche Mode, Ministry, a lot of the like Wax Track stuff that was like late 80s, early 90s. And then like during those times, like I found like Cabaret Voltaire, and then I found Throbbing Gristle and started kind of to look at noise music a little bit more, or just a lot noisier stuff. And I don't know, stuff like Neubauten. I guess like all like the OG industrial stuff was like really heavy on me, really pertinent to me seeing music in a completely different way. Like I remember hearing like Neubauten tracks and thinking like, man, what is this these dudes are playing? And then when I finally saw photos,
Yeah.
I was like blown away. I was like, whoa, these dudes just gathered up and just stuff that would work, that wasn't a traditional instrument.
Right.
And that was kind of a revelation. And then I started to hear like the artificial intelligence compilations that
Right.
I think it was Wax Tracks and Warp or something were putting out. And then that was where like I got turned on to Autechre
Mm-hmm.
and started to really follow them. And then the stuff that they were putting out in like 98, that got me really into like more abstract sound composition stuff. And at this time, you know, this is still pre-internet where you can't just be like, oh, I want to hear what, you know, what Pierre Schaeffer was doing, you know, tape music wise.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I never even really heard of any of that stuff.
It's interesting to me because it sounds the path that you carved out actually is really similar to my path, and the way it is that, you know, especially kind of like coming from industrial, and I just think that there were like touchstones all along the way. So I remember in industrial back when I was really into it, and the first time I heard, I think it was Hajab or somebody like that, and it was like, oh my God, they don't even have any freaking guitars on this whole thing. How can that possibly
Yeah.
be, you know? But then you had someone like Front 242 who comes along and sort of says, we're going to take some of the beats from this thing, we're going to take some of the angry sound from that thing, and it melds it and it sort of like draws you. And then Autechre was another one where it sort of like drew you in because it had the beat and it had some of the angry sound, but it also had this really abstract quality. And kind of that path is one that I think, I mean, you took. I feel like I took that path, but I seem to know a lot of people that did too. It was like these kind of touchstone artists that just sort of said, take what you think of now and imagine another step added to it, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it was like Autechre that got me into doing like beats that weren't like I want to say linear, you know, that were just constantly changing, constantly evolving, and random beat generation stuff. But then there's like, oh, what is it? It's EP7, the last track on it.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it's the last track on LP5. Like this really, I think it's called Drain 2 or something. And I've probably listened to that track 10,000 times. Like, just, but what it was it got me starting to think about the avant-garde and starting to like look for like the avant-garde of stuff that just timbre shifted through time and rhythm and melody like wasn't a factor at all.
Right.
I don't know, today that's how I start a lot of my tracks that I make, is like there's no rhythm or melody. Like I don't start off by writing a melody and I'm just going to build on this melody. I start off with sounds that timbre shift through time and not based on any kind of like time signature.
See, that's almost like backwards of how a lot of people work. A lot of people like lay down their equivalent of a rhythm section and then sort of like scorch over the top of it. But you say that you start off with that sound and then figure out what you, if you even want to add things later, you'll
Yeah.
do it later. You'll worry about it later.
So,
interesting.
Yeah, the drums and stuff like that and like percussion type sound, that's like some of the last stuff that I'm filling in.
It's interesting.
Trying to move several different sounds through the stereo field and timbre shifting and Sure, there's some pitch changes and stuff in it too, but yeah, I mean that's normally where I start with making my stuff.
That's really interesting, but that, you know what, too, that makes it so then doing sort of like the linear, ever changing rhythm tracks and stuff, it's a little easier to cope with that because then you're thinking of that as kind of like intertwining with your longer form timbral changes instead of, they have to stand alone because they're the first track that you laid down.
Yeah.
I get that. That's really interesting. So, how do you take this concept? I mean, you're known for the modular on the spot thing, which is basically A, it's live, B, no computers invited, thank you, and C, pretty much running along the riverbank somewhere, right? How do you take
Yeah.
this like
Well,
this concept and sort of like your audio quality, which is kind of heavy and affected and stuff like that? How do you take that into a performance environment?
well, it's that's a good question, I kind of just try to do the best I can with just adapting that into a smaller system, because I have a pretty decent sized system at home, and then what I do is I'll start the ideas here on the big system, and then I'll kind of just extract what modules I was using and try to put them into a smaller case that I can take down to the river or wherever the module on the spot's going to be. We just did some over the winter here in LA when we had all the rains. We did some at a really cool little outdoor cafe that sits along the LA River, because where we normally do them down in the river, just the water levels
Just
were up
underwater.
and
Yeah.
down, and we just didn't want to deal with that. So we did like a few months of them at this cafe, and it
Mhm.
was, and they were actually really cool. It's a cool little setting that still really agrees with what Modular on the Spot is, and I don't know how I adapt it to like live. I try to just get it into a small case and really try to make the most of what I'm taking, but with a focused direction towards the idea I had in the first place for like the composition. The past year or so, I've been really getting into idealizing small, multiple brand Eurorack systems that focus towards a specific patch or a specific piece or a specific composition, where the system is, they're always like really unique. Like some of them have been something where it's like a modular, really playable, jammable groove box. And
Mhm.
then some of them have been just for ambient, or then some of them have been for acid techno, or some of them have been like, we had Modular on the Spot last night, and I did a piece that was definitely granular madness. It was total exploration, but, or then some of them are configured to be like what I would take for like our small tours I'll do, where I'm trying to get like 5, 6, 7 different, completely different sounding sections of a show out of my system, and that's where you kind of really got to milk this stuff to have some totally different sounding sections and different sounding rhythms, and I don't know. Yeah, trying to make the most of it. I trying to make the most of it, I guess.
Right. So
Um,
let's talk a little bit about this though, because this idea of so I only have a small system just because for me I went haywire and then I was like, oh man, when I had too many modules and too big of a system, I lived too much in like a collector's mode, right? And I was like, oh shit, I don't want to spend all my time like searching Muff Wiggler for, another pingable event generator so that I have the right
yeah,
quadruple set, right, or something like that, whatever. So I just ended up paring back to this really small system, and I find it really freeing to work with that. But it ended up kind of becoming purpose built for how I think of playing, right? Now you're talking about building purpose built systems almost based on your mood for a specific day, is what it kind of sounds like, or the mood that a compositional idea might take you, right?
yeah, or for a specific Yeah, or for a specific composition, or sometimes it's just a challenge of like, hey, what can I get in a 9U system that's like 84 HP wide?
Right.
What can I get in this one system and get the most out of it and be able to do like a whole full show and be able to have something that is really playable, really jammable. I don't know. That's kind of what that's like a puzzle that I try to think about all the time. Is like new little system configurations, and
Got it.
Modular on the Spot is such a great thing for that because you technically are performing, but you know what? It's a picnic. It's not a it's not a club show. It's
Right.
not a serious atmosphere. It's not supposed to be. It's community, it's a hangout, it's a picnic. You know, some people show up with like 18U and even more, and it's like, oh man, I would imagine that all the work you put into that, why wouldn't you just like why wouldn't you just book a club gig and
Right.
play that at a club gig? Like, hey, you can come down here with 9U and just noodle out and like do something cool and fun with that, and it's like the same thing. You know, some people really take it really seriously,
Right.
and I'm trying to get the message out there to like, hey, it doesn't have to be that serious. Like, if you want to take it serious like that, okay, cool. Well, I'm going to take something serious like that. That's like from like my tours and like club gigs and like Moog Fest and stuff like that. I'm not like, you know, like I said, we had one last night and I did this granular exploration. I put the system together yesterday and built the patch in like 20 minutes and was like, okay, we got to load the car. Let's go. It was like really on the spot, kind
Right.
of just
Literally.
did it. Yeah, did it on the fly. And it was an idea that I had for using a bunch of certain modules together in one small 6-7U system. Modular on the Spot is such a great place for people to come and check out modular synth stuff, or if you're playing, to just try out some ideas. It doesn't have to be the totally refined idea. You can just try out ideas. It's a cool, fully open, whatever you want it to be kind of thing.
Well, and
That's what's
see,
awesome about it.
yeah, I'll tell you, I have talked to a number of people, and just some of my friends have performed at the Modular Spot things, and one thing everyone talks about is sort of the laid back aspect of it as being very different, either from gigs, from typical gigs, or from sort of the synth nerd gatherings that sometimes happen, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the synthgasms or whatever you want to call them, because in those cases it's like, well, I have to make sure that I have the largest collection of, buyable gear to somehow prove, my, in most cases, to prove my masculinity, right? And that's kind of specifically not what the Modular Spot does. And that's one of the things that a lot of people point to as being particularly cool about it. It really is a hangout. It really is about something where everyone's very supportive of one another and supportive of people experimenting with where they're going. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty rare in any kind of performing situation.
Sure. And the other thing too is like, if you've been to them, it's like, hey, and you have a modular, come do something. We've had so many people like, hey, this is my first time I'm ever playing with my modular, almost in a performance kind of thing,
Right.
in front of people. It's like people's like first show ever. I mean, actually, Tony Rolando played his first show ever at Modular on the Spot.
Hey, you know what? That actually came up. I was on a panel with him at Berklee College of Music. Not Was it last weekend? No, it was the weekend before last. And we were talking about performances and stuff. And he mentioned that his first live performance ever was swinging out there and trying to come up with something. And he talked about it as being such a beautiful experience.
We were really excited to have Tony out here, and then we didn't even know until it was like that day or like the day before. He was like, "Dude, I've never played with one of my systems. Like, I've never done a live show, and I still am reluctant. I'm like thinking to myself, like, while I'm saying that, like, live show, it's like, it's a picnic though. It's like, it's, yeah, you're performing, I guess you're playing a piece of music that you're making in front of other people. But that blew my mind. I was like, wait, Tony, you've never played a show with this stuff? Like, he'd been making this stuff forever and make
Right.
awesome stuff. Like, whoa, wait a minute. So he was like so nervous, and I had to like calm him down and be like, Tony, you gotta chill, dude. It's a picnic. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. He was like, oh man, this sucks. I'm like, man, no way, dude. You're fine. There's no judgments, man. If you make some obvious screw ups, who cares?
Right.
It's a picnic, and it's like just the community hanging out. It doesn't have the stuffy vibe of like a club show.
Well, in
And
fact,
that's what we wanted.
yeah, one of the things I would say in that kind of environment, it's unlike a club show because if you screw up, the people listening, instead of saying, "Oh, that was a fuck up," they're more likely to say, "Oh, I remember that happened to me once," and it like
Yeah,
starts a conversation instead of being an embarrassment, right?
for sure.
It's pretty hilarious. Well, now I'm curious. We were talking before a little bit about the guitar and how you don't really listen to guitar music, and that's like a whole conversation because I'm not even sure there is. I don't know that there is anything that's like modern guitar music. Everything I hear is like some sort of nostalgic version of what guitar used to be at some period in time, right?
That
But
is correct.
one of the things I would say is that a lot of the music that people working with modulars are doesn't really have that kind of. I mean, there are a few people that are trying to do Silver Apples of the Moon, or are trying to kind of do the, do the Bukla bongos yet again or whatever. But for the most part, people are trying to do like the equivalent of a SH-101 arpeggiator, right? But
Well,
for
I
the
hear that at times, but I hear a lot of people trying to do like the Robert Rich and
oh
trying to
yeah, yeah.
do a lot of like big spatial, kind of ambient, kind of new age stuff.
Oh, right, sure.
I've been hearing a lot more and more of that lately. Is I've been seeing and hearing a lot more of that. So I guess around LA, I've been hearing a lot more of that lately.
Interesting. Well, I was going to ask you a little bit about what you're seeing emerging from, because you probably more than anybody else have the opportunity to see what people are coming up with, like in their basement laboratories, right? As they're putting together little systems and getting the right effects and all that stuff. Probably some of the first place they're showing that work is at the Modular Spot gigs, right? And what do you think? What do you see in general, and what do you see that is kind of a trap for people? Because I think that
Hmm.
modular has some kind of obvious traps, but I'm curious to hear what you think.
Well, I think the traps kind of come in with people kind of hearing something at maybe one of the other modular on the spots, or at another like modular show or something, and be like, oh, I want to do something. I want to incorporate like that kind of thing into like what I'm doing, or like, oh, I want that sound and like what I'm doing, or like, oh, I want those rhythms and like what I'm doing. Um, where that's the trap, because then that's the same thing that's going on in guitar world. It's like people are just like, oh, I want to do that, and it's like, well, hey, you know what? Like, explore this stuff deeply and do what you really want to do. Like, explore this stuff deeply and bring out what's really in you, and not what you hear from other people that you think is cool sounding.
Right.
If you explore this stuff deeply and bring out what is in you, you're gonna bring out something cool sounding, and that's where the rest of us are gonna be like, whoa, shit, that was amazing. But what's some of the stuff that I've been hearing lately that I'll say this basic, and it wasn't at Modular on the Spot, but it was on this little West Coast tour that I just did, and we were at the Synth Meet in Portland, and I played the show, Bana played the show, Tyler from WMD played the show, and Basic played the show. Well, Basic rocked a 6U and played one of the most amazing Euro sets I've ever heard.
Really?
And it was in his style of beats to avant-garde, just digital timbre shifting noodles to breakcore, just super heavy. But I don't think I've ever seen anybody juice a 6U like that before, ever.
Wow.
I don't think that's really been done on that kind of level before. With not, I mean, and he had like no, I don't think he had any like sample playback modules in there, or maybe he had a qubit wave in there. I can't remember what all was set up, but it was like, man, it was like that 6U was like a wet sponge, and he literally wrung every drop out of it. And it was amazing. And I mean, he played for like almost an hour.
Off of a 6U.
45 minutes. And I was like, 45, 50 minutes. I was like, wow, dude, with an encore. We were all screaming at the top of our lungs. It was amazing.
Unreal.
And I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think of other stuff that I've kind of heard lately that's kind of came out that kind of really, really caught my eye. You know, Mike Dobler's another guy that really squeezes every ounce out of like a 6U and does really abstract, really just, I don't know, avant-garde kind of stuff that breaks into like rhythmic kind of beat sections and stuff. And he's really good, and I've always enjoyed his stuff. And that dude starts his sets with no patch cables in his system.
Right.
And builds the patch live on the fly. And you know what? That blows my mind every time. It seriously blows my mind every time. I think we were talking about, I think we're going to have a Modular on the Spot coming up that everybody starts no patch cables.
Right.
And what happens is what happens. We have to start it's an empty slate Modular on the Spot.
Yeah, that's cool.
I think that would be a really good one. But I don't know, I really like Mike's stuff. I'm trying to think who else that really has stood out lately. Anthony Baldino always blows my mind.
I just talked to him. I just interviewed him like 2 days ago. He's an amazing cat.
A really, really good friend of ours, and he's like the unsung hero of this stuff, man. He really is. He blows my mind every time. And it's like so low key about it that I started getting booked for shows. And I was like, hey, I'll only play the show if Anthony can play it too. Because I got to like get this dude out more and like have some people hear some of his music, because he is like the underground unsung hero of the stuff. The stuff that he makes is like so next level and refined that, I don't know. And like him and Mike and Basic, these are all like my good friends. It's like, this is like our scene here in town. And like Ted Butler, Bana as well. You know, the Qubit guys are here in town. Stephen McCall lives right down the street. He's in town. You know, so many other people. Tom Hall. Like, we got a really good scene here in town. And like, these are all our friends that we're around all the time. It's unique. Now this is making me think I need to be shooting more photos of it all the time.
Well, I was going to ask, first of all, I mean, people outside of LA are starting to joke about there being sort of like an LA Modular Mafia, right? So you guys, you do
Wow.
stuff together, you talk about each other's work and stuff like that, and it's kind of fun and funny. What I wonder is to what extent did the modular bring you guys together, and to what extent was it that you liked each other and turned each other on to modulars? Which came first, the modulars or the friends?
I think it was we were all into modulars, but none of us knew each other. Like Derek
Uh,
knew Mike, and then Steven just started making stuff. I mean, Steven's only had noise engineering for like 4 years or
yeah,
something.
right.
There was a bunch of us were still all like hiding in our bedrooms with our systems. Derek was like kind of just getting into modular and using it because he was more of like a temp, doing stuff with Tempest and drum machines and stuff.
Right.
I'm trying to think what it was that kind of brought us all. You know who brought us all together? Actually, I think about it, and I got to shout this dude out. And he's done more for me and so many of us in our LA modular scene is Cyrus Rex.
Mm-hmm.
Cyrus Rex would be a great person for you to talk to too.
Right.
That dude brought all of us together. I know
Interesting.
all these dudes through Cyrus Rex.
What did he do to introduce them to you? Did he have like get-togethers, or did he just say, "Hey, here's someone to talk to"?
He has a massive modular.
Right.
And he would always, like, when I invited him, he was like, I had like a 6U, and he was like, hey, come over, I have a bunch of modular stuff. Like, just, if he gets a good vibe from you that, like, you're not going to come over and trash this place.
Right.
It's like, he's very open to meet new people and have them over and get to know them. And, like, I learned so much from him. And then when we started doing the Muff Wiggler site together and running the Muff Wiggler store and doing those Muff Wiggler events, making all those videos that were on the Muff Wiggler Vimeo and site, I got to know Cyrus really well. And he really is a super good friend. He's an amazing person. And then all these people would be coming over where we were like, hey, let's do some artist interviews. And he's like, oh, man, I know this dude, Mike. We got to interview him. Mike Dobler. And it was like, that was how I met Mike. And then, like, we were doing stuff here, and, like, we started to do some stuff in town. And then, like, Ged Jangris started to, like, tag us in on posts. And we got to know Ged really well. And we went and did an interview with Ged. And Derek was, like, hanging out with us the whole time. Or, like, Andrew Felix, I kind of met through him, but met through going to Analog Haven. Yeah, I guess we do have quite a scene here. Some people have said that we have the best scene. Tony Rolando was saying that he thought that we have the best scene in the United States. And I don't know. I still look at the scene in New York and I'm like, oh, wow, like all the raddest dudes are there, like Rob Lowe's in New York, but I don't know. We have a lot of people out here. I try to think about it like, our scene's better than yours. I don't ever think about it like that. It's just like,
Sure.
hey, we're just doing what we do, and it's like our friends like all hanging out. And then it was like that was how we met Bana was we took a demo table to a I Dream of Wires screening, and she showed up, and because she was interested in modulars and just got a Voyager and found out what a Buchla was and was like, oh, they're screening this movie? I got to go see this. That was how Cyrus and I met her.
Unreal.
She showed up to the movie and then just we welcomed her in and she became part of our crew.
Right.
There's plenty of people like that. Like Tom was already out here, but, he started coming to Modular on the Spot and we got to know him and it was like, wow, there's so many people that came to Modular on the Spot that were like, you know what, this is really cool. I want to build a system and learn how to make music with a system like this, and I want to play at Modular on the Spot. There's a guy, Andrew, that played at Modular on the Spot last night that a year and a half ago, he was coming over to my house to like research what modules he wanted to buy and start to build a system, and he played in a really awesome set last night.
That's great.
We're seeing new people get into this. We're seeing people play their first shows or play their first piece for other people. Yeah, we're seeing it grow.
Well, and you know what's funny is that the way that it's the excitement that people talk about it and the way that this thing is growing and stuff like that, it's funny because it doesn't feel like a music thing. It feels almost like a religion thing or something, right? And it's funny to me, but at the same time, there is sort of like this, I don't know, make noise saved my soul kind of aspect to this whole thing because it does, it opens the door for a lot of self realization, but also you get to do it around other people and you get to have fun while you're doing it, which is a pretty big win.
For sure. If this ever became a church, Scott Yeager would be the Pope.
I think he would be happy to take the role too. I think he would look good
I,
with
I
the
believe
he would
that.
look
I
good with
believe
the
you
hat
to be
on.
correct on that.
He would look good with the
That is
hat
that
on.
is for sure. That is for sure. And the bishop would be Tony.
Right,
I
indeed.
for sure, definitely. It's funny, like hearing that, and like how one of the things I want to say about Modular on the Spot is it doesn't have to be a big organized event like we do in L.A. Or like the dudes do in Seattle or like Chicago. You know what, Darwin? If you want to do one next weekend in your backyard, you know what? Invite a few friends over, take the speakers out back and the systems out back, and jam out outside and have a good time.
Right.
You know what? That's the same thing.
Yeah.
That's Modular on the Spot. It's whatever you want to be. Or if you want to go camping and run your system off of your car and listen to your system through your car speakers, cool. That could be it too. It's whatever you want it to be. Just keep it outdoors. Keep it, if anybody wants to show up and check it out, keep it open to anyone and just use a modular. That's it. It's literally like that simple. And one of the things that I think Ben and I we're trying to get some camping time coming up. And we're just like, you know what? Like, we like to take these out and just go jam out on our own in the desert. It could be a solo sesh.
Right.
You could take a couple people with you, or you could organize 50 people to come out there. It's any and all of it. That's what I want to remind people about Modular on the Spot, is it doesn't have to be a big, big organized event. It can be as small as you want it to be.
Well, I think that's an important thing to do or to talk about because it would be tempting now for anybody, for a guy like me to say, oh, well, if I would have gotten into it X number of years ago when it was small, it could have, I could have had these things, but now it's too big for me. There's no such thing.
For sure. And like when Ben and I go camping and we jam out outside in the desert somewhere or wherever we're camping, or we did this trip up the Oregon coast and it was awesome. And it was like, you know what? I had just as much fun doing that, just us two, as I did last night. Like and a ton of my friends were there. And sure, it's great to like have the friends around and stuff, but you know what? It was just as much fun, like just us.
Indeed.
And just exploring. And you know what? And making a piece of music on the spot just for me.
So, Rodent, I appreciate your time. One last question, because I just called you Rodent, and it reminded me that I wanted to ask you about this. When people go online, they're going to find a few ways to hear your music or find out about you. And sometimes you're called Rodent, and sometimes you're called Rodent 516. Very occasionally, but not very often, you're called Eric. Which are you? Rodent and Rodent 516 are the same. Why the different names?
Well, Rodent's always been my nickname since I was a little kid.
Okay.
And I actually, this industrial band that I had in the early 90s in Washington, D.C. was called Rodent. It was short-lived, and, the quality of it was probably pretty horrible. But that's been my nickname. It's been the name that I put on all my photo work. Rodent 516 is my Instagram handle. And then when I started getting asked to play shows in LA, out of nowhere, like I see the flyer for the show, and it says Rodent 516 on it. So I got booked as Rodent 516 a few different times, and that is how people started putting that, on flyers and on posts and stuff. And
Sure.
Really, Rodent 516 is my Instagram handle. Like,
Got it.
like my tapes, my records and stuff all just say Rodent on it. It's really just Rodent. So, but
Got it. Sometimes the internet decides to name us on its own right?
yeah, it can for sure.
Dude.
But to clear up the confusion, if there is any, yeah, it's just Rodent.
All right, cool. Well, hey, man, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been a great chat, and I am so looking forward to getting out there sometime to where I can come and check out one of the shows. Maybe sometime I'll come out and play one. If nothing else, Tom Hall's a good friend of mine, and he is constantly pestering me to do it. So I got to find a way to make it out there and be a part of it. But you make the great point. There's nothing stopping me from running an extension cord out to the backyard and getting it on. So I appreciate that.
Yeah,
that
and
impetus
you know what?
as well.
That's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it, is you can do your own. If you got a nice space to do it outside, do that.
Yeah.
You know, get out of the house.
Get out of
Get out of the from outside.
Yeah, get out of your mom's basement and do it, right?
That's the whole motivation, kind of really behind the whole thing.
That's
but
awesome.
Dude, thanks so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, it was great.
Really,
it was great talking.
I've listened to several different episodes, and it's a good show, man. Keep it going. I like it.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Well, with that, I'll let you get on with your day. I'll talk to you again soon.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Darwin.
All right, bye. So I want to thank Rodent for the opportunity to hang out and talk. Eric's a great guy, and if you aren't checking out the Modular on the Spot stuff, whether it's in LA or wherever you happen to live, find out if there's any of the Modular Spot on the Spot stuff going on and check it out. It's, as you can tell, it's something that really inspires people. I want to just let you know that this week we're likely to bridge the 500,000 direct downloads level, which, because of the multipliers of consolidators and stuff, just means a number of listeners on this podcast. It's all because of you, because of your willingness to listen consistently and to share with your friends. And it's also, I also especially want to shout out to two groups. First of all my friends at Cycling 74, who've done a really great job of letting people know what's going on. And then also my friends at Synthtopia, who are really responsible for some pretty big leaps in the listenership here. So I want to thank all of you so much for helping this become a successful podcast. And I hope you keep listening. Catch you later. Bye.